While there are crazy social justice warriors who do very stupid things like blocking white people from getting to class at UC Berkeley, the truth is that both systemic racism and white privilege do both exist. Now, the definition of institutional racism is a form of racism expressed in the practice of social and political institutions. Now, of course, African Americans were enslaved for a very long time, and then after that, they were subjected to Jim Crow laws, and after that, they were still, having unfair housing policies. And so the system that we live in right now is essentially your school is based, how good your school is based on basically the funding that comes to it. Now, the funding of public schools is based on property taxes, local property taxes. And so the further impoverished neighborhood that you live in, the worse of a school that you're going to be going to, because that's going to have less funding. Now, of course, African Americans are disproportionately victims of poverty, and that is in large part due to generational wealth being destroyed, because the generations of people that came before them not only were enslaved, but they were subjected to Jim Crow laws, and most importantly, unfair housing policies. Because when you look at the family wealth and how people are better off, for these people, when the cutoff is set off at a bad spot in which they're not given, in which they're victims of unfair housing policies, they are going to be much more likely to be impoverished. So not only is that an example of institutional racism, but it's also a privilege that white people do have, because they don't have to worry about the ills that come, centuries later from slavery and Jim Crow and all of the racism that came after that. So they don't have to worry about the generational wealth being cut off for the specific reason of being enslaved for decades and then being subjected to Jim Crow laws for decades and unfair housing policies, and they do not have to be victim of that. So that in and of itself is a privilege. Now again, the definition of institutional racism is a form of racism expressed in the practice of social and political institutions. Now, this is very important to understand, because this is different from your typical racism that you would understand. This is institutional racism, racism within that is exhibited by the institutions, and study after study after study have proven this to be the case. Now, we're going to be looking at some studies here. Here is one here that explains that despite marijuana usage rates being extremely similar between white people and black people, the actual arrests are massively black. They are by far, rate-wise, far more arrested for marijuana possession and usage. So as you can see in this first figure, it shows how in 2001 the percentage of white people who used it more was actually more, but all the other years they're very close. The actual difference is, less than 5% each year. In 2004, it's basically minuscule, as well as 2009, and it's all basically the same. It stayed relatively the same. They're not very different percentage-wise, but if you actually check out this figure, these are the arrest rates for marijuana possession by race. And as you can see, the white arrest rate has stayed pretty much steady, almost exactly. And the African American one had gone up, but it had stayed steady between about 2006 and 2010. It had stayed around the same area. But what you're looking at is, for the white arrest rate is sitting around 200 per 100,000, while the black arrest rate went up from about like 530 out of 100,000 all the way up to a max of like 750 per 100,000, which is insanity. So despite black people and white people actually using marijuana at the same rates, they were subjected to being far, far more actually arrested for the same crime. That's the same thing. And so the institution is exhibiting racism in and of itself. Now, the judicial system exhibits a lot of racism. The institution of justice, the institution that is actually supposed to be the least racist, is actually the most. So we have a bunch of studies. So first, there was a Supreme Court case that was United States versus Booker, and that gave federal judges more leeway in how they were able to charge and determine the sentencings. And so it was giving them more leeway and pulling away from having them strictly adhere to specific guidelines. And that has resulted in consistent and in some cases growing disparities in actual charges as well as actual sentences. So there was a 2014 University of Michigan Law School study that found that all other factors being equal, black offenders were 75% more likely to face a charge carrying a mandatory minimum sentence than a white offender who committed the same crime. So this is the first charge that they are given. It is more likely for a black person to be given a charge that mandates for a minimum sentence that you have to serve for this amount of time. African Americans are far more likely to be first charged with that. And on top of that, from the Sentencing Commission, they did a report that was an updated version of the Booker report, which they do, I believe, every 4 years. So it says the commission's analysis of demographic prison data from 2012 to 2016 found that black men serve sentences that are on average 19.1% longer than those for white men for similar crimes. So another one here says this is even crazier because it's accounting for violence in an offender's past. It says, when accounting for violence in an offender's past, black men receive sentences that were on average 20.4% longer than that of white men, according to the Commission's analysis of the fiscal year 2016 data, the only year for which such data is actually available. So essentially what you're looking at is the institution of justice, which is supposed to be the judicial system, which is supposed to be actually serving the justice, is being the least, just in its racism that is going on. And the reason is A, the executive, which, are the police force who are giving these charges, are giving charges to African Americans that are mandatory minimums at higher rates than white people for doing the same exact thing. And on top of that, because of the Booker Supreme Court case, what it resulted in is it made it so that these federal judges are now given more leeway, and that extra leeway has resulted in these judges giving more leeway to white people over black people, so they're more likely to give them harsher charges for the same crime, and they are also more likely to give leeway to white people over black people. And as it says, 20% more, it's a 20% disparity when you control for violence in an offender's past and you control all of the actual variables. It is 20%. That is a ginormous disparity in sentencing. And without that, it's 19%. So it becomes an even higher disparity when you control for violence in an offender's past. So while there may be a certain amount of people who are either really extreme, who, do, as I stated, stupid things like blocking white people from getting to class at Berkeley, the facts don't change, because every year that you look at this, these studies continue over and over and over again to continue to prove the truth, the fact that systemic racism does exist in multiple forms, as I broke down. But the sentencing of African Americans is very clearly stronger for no reason than it is for white people in the United States. So it is important not to forget that systemic racism is an issue that needs to be solved. And as well as there being privileges that a lot of people don't actually want to admit for whatever reason that may be.